The night Declan held out a velvet box in the middle of the Harrington Grand Ballroom and called it a gift, Vivienne already knew something was wrong. Not because she had seen the box before, not because she recognized the tissue paper or the ribbon. She knew because Declan's father, Rowan, had spent 40 minutes at the pre-dinner table talking about Orrell and Voss, about how the brand was the pinnacle of Canadian luxury craftsmanship, how their jewelry pieces were displayed in embassies, how he had personally met with the procurement team last spring. And Rowan had said all of this while his daughter-in-law, Vivienne Orrell Harwood, 37-year-old wife of Declan Harwood and sole founding owner of Orrell and Voss, had sat across from him and said nothing. She had smiled and asked if anyone needed more water. That was who Vivienne was. That was what 11 years of marriage had trained her to be: quiet, careful, invisible in a way that no one ever questioned. Declan had once called it grace. His mother had once called it class. Vivienne had known even then that what they really meant was convenient. The Harrington Grand Ballroom was full. 230 guests, most of them connected to Declan's law firm. Some of them from Rowan's circle of old money and older opinions. It was Vivienne's 42nd birthday. She had not wanted a party. She had asked twice for something small. Dinner at the lake house, maybe a few friends, nothing that required a florist and a seating chart. Declan had smiled at her the way he always did when he had already decided and was simply waiting for her to catch up. "You deserve something real," he had said. She had not asked what he meant by real. Now she sat at the center table while the room quieted around her, while Declan stood with the easy confidence of a man who had never once doubted his own judgment. And she watched him present the box the way a man presents something he is proud of. Both hands, a small practiced pause before opening it. The necklace inside was silver-toned, with a pendant drop that caught the chandelier light. The craftsmanship looked fine from a distance. The clasp had the right shape. The case was the right color. But Vivienne saw the seam on the certificate card before Declan had finished his toast. She did not flinch. She did not look away from him. She kept her expression exactly where it was, steady, pleasant. The expression 11 years had made almost involuntary, and she let him finish. "Happy birthday," Declan said, and the room applauded, and his girlfriend, who was seated 4 tables back under the name of a junior associate, lifted her champagne glass just slightly too high. Vivienne had known about Kieran for 7 months. She had not said anything about that either. There is a particular kind of silence that belongs to women who have been underestimated for so long that they have learned to live inside it. Vivienne Orrell Harwood had grown up in Thunder Bay, Ontario, the daughter of a watchmaker and a woman who repaired antique textiles for museums. Her parents had taught her 2 things with equal emphasis: precision matters, and no one needs to know what you know until the moment it becomes necessary. She had moved to Toronto at 22 with a design portfolio, a second-hand sewing machine, and a clarity of vision that her professors called unusual and her early clients called unsettling. By 26, she had 3 wholesale accounts. By 29, she had a flagship on King Street West. By 33, Orrell and Voss had been profiled in the Globe and Mail as one of the 10 most significant independent luxury brands to emerge from Canada in a generation. She had met Declan Harwood at a charity gala in the winter of the year the profile ran. He was charming and tall and the kind of good-looking that photographs well. He had not recognized her name. She had not corrected him. He had asked her what she did, and she had said she worked in design, and he had nodded in the way people nod when they're already thinking about what they will say next. She had married him 14 months later, which was perhaps the first decision she had ever made that her mother could not entirely explain. "You know what you are doing," her mother had said carefully the night before the wedding. "I do," Vivienne had said. She had meant it both ways. The early years were not bad. They were just ordinary in the way that slowly becomes a kind of suffocation. Declan's practice grew. Vivienne's company grew faster and more quietly because she had learned by then that certain dinner tables had a low ceiling for women whose businesses outperformed their husbands, and Declan's father set the height of that ceiling every time he spoke. She structured her public presence deliberately. The company name carried her mother's maiden name, Orrell, not her married name, and the majority of their social circle had never looked closely enough to connect Vivienne Harwood to Vivienne Orrell Harwood, founder and CEO. Rowan Harwood had attended the launch of Orrell and Voss's 5th anniversary collection. He had shaken hands with the PR director and complimented the canapés. He had not recognized his own daughter-in-law standing 12 feet away in a black dress that the Ottawa Citizen would describe the next morning as quietly authoritative. He had told Declan afterward that the brand was one to watch. Declan had agreed. He had told his father that he should look into investing. Neither of them had mentioned it to Vivienne. She had known about the necklace before the party. Not this specific necklace, Not the box or the tissue paper, or Declan's expression when he lifted the lid, but she had known something was coming, because her head of brand protection, a precise woman named Olivier, who had been with the company for 6 years, had flagged 3 counterfeit Oral & Voss pieces, circulating through a grey market reseller in Vaughan. The pieces were good, better than most fakes. The class profile was close enough to fool someone who hadn't spent a decade designing the original. The certificate seam was the tell. Oral & Voss certificates were printed on cotton bond with a watermark that shifted color at an angle. The fakes were flat. You had to know to look. Vivienne knew. When Declan opened the box in the Harrington Grand Ballroom, she looked at the pendant the way her father had once taught her to look at a watch movement. Not at the surface, but at the integrity behind it. And she saw, in the space of a breath, that the piece in the box was not hers. Someone had bought her husband a fake version of her own jewelry to give her as a birthday gift. The geometry of that was almost beautiful. She let the applause settle. She let Declan place the necklace around her neck, his hands briefly on her shoulders, and she felt the cool weight of a lie against her collarbones. She reached up and touched the pendant once. The way you touch something to confirm it is real. Then she picked up her wineglass and turned to the room. "Before I say anything," she said, and her voice was the same voice she used in board meetings, clear and unhurried. "I'd like to have this appraised." Declan laughed. It was the laugh of a man who thinks someone is joking. "Vivienne, I'm not joking, Declan." The room had the particular quality of 230 people suddenly deciding not to breathe. "We have a gemologist in the room," Vivienne continued, because they did. A woman named Dr. Annette Boucheron, who had authenticated pieces for the Arjo, and who had been seated at table 11, near the window, specifically because Vivienne had asked her to be there. "Annette, would you mind?" Dr. Boucheron was already standing. Declan's composure held for approximately 90 seconds after Annette took the necklace. It was, in retrospect, longer than Vivienne had expected. He was a lawyer. He was trained to look untroubled, but 230 people were watching, and his father was at the adjacent table. And the woman he had been seeing for 7 months was 4 tables back and had just set down her champagne glass very carefully. And the necklace in Annette's hands was not what he had believed it to be when the reseller in Vaughan had sold it to him for $400 instead of the $4,200 the real version cost. Annette examined the clasp under a loupe for 40 seconds. She turned the certificate card at an angle and watched the watermark stay flat. She set both items on the white tablecloth and looked at Vivienne. "The pendant is silver-plated alloy," she said. "The center stone is cubic zirconia. The certificate is not authentic." She said it the way a doctor delivers a result, without judgment, without apology, with complete precision. The room did not make a sound. Declan said, "That isn't. I was told." "Who told you?" Vivienne asked. He stopped. "Where did you purchase it, Declan?" He said nothing. His jaw was doing the thing it did when he was restructuring. Rowan Harwood stood up from the adjacent table. He was the kind of man who stood up when he felt that a situation required his management. "Now let's not make a scene out of what is clearly a..." "Rowan." Vivienne's voice was pleasant. "Sit down, please." Rowan sat down. He did it automatically, the way people respond to a register of authority they weren't expecting from a direction they'd discounted. He sat down and then seemed briefly surprised at himself for having done it. Vivienne unclasped the necklace and set it on the table. She looked at it for a moment, the way you look at something you are finished with. Then she looked at her husband. "You spent the last 4 months telling me I was ungrateful," she said. "That I didn't appreciate what you provided, that I was difficult and cold, and that any problems in this marriage were the result of my priorities." Declan's expression shifted toward the version he used with difficult, opposing counsel. "I'd like to show you something," Vivienne said. She reached into the small clutch she'd carried all evening, a beaded piece her mother had made, years ago, not a branded item, not anything anyone in this room would recognize, and she removed her phone. She opened an email and handed the phone to the person nearest her, which happened to be Rowan. "That's the board letter from Oral & Voss's last annual review," she said. "Scroll down to the signature." Rowan scrolled. His expression changed the way a landscape changes when the light goes. "My father started a watchmaking shop in Thunder Bay in 1987, Vivienne said to the room, not to Declan specifically, not to anyone specifically, just to the room. "I started Oral & Voss in 2011 with what was left of his tools and the textile knowledge my mother spent 30 years building. The brand you've been investing in, Rowan, the one you called a pinnacle of Canadian craftsmanship at dinner tonight. I built it. It is mine. It has always been mine." She could hear distantly the particular sound of a room recalibrating. "The necklace your son bought me tonight, the one he presented in an Oral & Voss box as a birthday gift in front of 230 people, is a counterfeit of my own work. It's not even a good one. Declan said her name once, the way you say someone's name when you are trying to change the subject and running out of ways to do it. She turned to look at him. She had loved him once. She had loved him in the way you love something you have chosen, before you understood the full cost of the choice. And she had stayed because staying had felt, for a long time, like the more dignified thing to do. She had watched him become careless, and then unkind, and then finally brazen. Dinner receipts she was not supposed to find, a phone that went face down. Whenever she walked into the room, a girlfriend whose LinkedIn profile described her as junior associate at Harwood and Price. The firm Vivienne had helped capitalize in its first year with a personal guarantee she had never mentioned to anyone. She had a folder. Her solicitor, a woman named Margot, who worked out of a quiet office on Bay Street and who had once told Vivienne that the best legal preparation was patience, had been building it for 5 months. The folder contained the personal guarantee documentation, the firm's founding capital records, 7 months of communication between Declan and Kieran Ashby that Kieran herself had inadvertently forwarded to a shared account she'd forgotten existed, and a property assessment of the lake house, which was, it turned out, in Vivienne's name and had been since 2018. I'm not going to do this here, Vivienne said. Not because I can't, because I've already done it, and the paperwork is filed, and Margot has been very thorough. She looked at him for a moment longer. He was still handsome. He was still the kind of man photographs well. He looked right now like someone who had opened a door and found a room he hadn't known was there. The lake house is mine, she said. The founding capital is on record, and the necklace, she glanced at the fake piece on the table, is evidence. She picked up her wine glass. The wine was a 2019 Chablis that the sommelier had selected at her direction, and it was very good. Happy birthday to me, she said quietly, to no one in particular, and she meant it. Rowan Harwood did not speak for the rest of the evening. He sat at his table with the careful stillness of a man processing a significant revision to his understanding of events, and Vivienne found to her own mild surprise that she felt no satisfaction in it, not because he didn't deserve the revision. He did, but because she had spent enough years being angry about things that couldn't be unspent, and she had decided some time ago that the energy of being right was better used than savored. Kieran Ashby left quietly, through the side exit near the coat check. Vivienne had been told she was there and had not moved to intercept her. That was not her problem to manage. Declan stayed. He had nowhere obvious to go, and he was the kind of man who defaults to holding position when retreat feels too much like admission. He sat at the head table with the necklace box in front of him and the expression of someone who had prepared a very different speech for tonight and could not locate an alternative. Dr. Beaucheron returned the pendant and the certificate to the table. She gave Vivienne a small nod. They had met twice before at industry events, and Annette had the professional composure of someone who had authenticated fakes in stranger contexts than a birthday party. Vivienne's best friend, Dorothy, who had been sitting 4 seats down with the disciplined expression of someone who had known this moment was coming and had nonetheless not been entirely prepared for the scale of it, leaned over and said, very quietly, I told you the Chablis was the right call. Vivienne smiled. It was the first unguarded smile of the evening. You did, she said later, after the room had found the uncertain rhythm that follows a significant social event no one was prepared for, after the catering staff had begun quietly removing the surplus champagne, after Rowan had spoken to his son in a low voice near the emergency exit and Declan had not responded in any way that appeared to help. Vivienne stood near the tall windows on the east side of the ballroom and looked out at the city. Toronto in November had a particular quality of light. The CN Tower was lit in white. The lake beyond was dark and still. She thought about her father's workbench, the organized rows of tools, the way he would hold a movement to the light and say nothing for a long time, just looking, because the first step in repairing something was understanding exactly what was broken and being honest with yourself about the extent of it. Not the surface, the integrity beneath. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from Declan. She did not return them. She thought about 11 years. She thought about the lake house and the founding capital records and the folder that Margot had built with the patience of someone who understood that precision mattered. She thought about her mother sitting across from Rowan Harwood at dinner, listening to him praise Aurel and Voss, and choosing silence over correction, not because she lacked the words, but because she had always understood that some things land harder when they are saved for the right moment. She thought about the necklace. Someone had built it carefully. Whoever made the fake, they had studied the original. They had gotten the profile of the clasp almost right. They had understood the aesthetic language well enough to approximate it, but they had not understood the watermark, because the watermark was the part she had designed herself. with her father's eye for the thing you couldn't replicate by looking at the surface. You had to know where to look. She picked up her clutch. She said goodnight to Dorothy and to Annette and to 3 other people she was genuinely glad had been in the room tonight. She walked across the ballroom floor without hurrying. She did not look at the head table where Declan was sitting. She had already looked at him enough and seen enough and said what needed to be said. The coat check attendant, a young man who had witnessed everything and was handling it with impressive professionalism, retrieved her coat without a word. She tipped him well. Outside the night was cold and clean, the way November nights in this city can be when the wind comes in off the water and the air has that quality of starting over, she called Margot. It went as planned, she said. Margot said, good. The filing confirmation came through this afternoon. Do you want to talk through the next steps tonight or tomorrow? Tomorrow, Vivienne said. Tonight I'm going home. She meant the apartment on Adelaide that she had owned since before the marriage, the one she had never sold, the one Declan had never asked about because he had never thought to ask, the one with her mother's textile pieces on the walls and her father's first clock on the mantel, and a kitchen. She had stocked herself with things she actually wanted. She had been quiet for 11 years, not because she lacked the words, not because she was afraid, because she had learned from the 2 most precise people she had ever known that you hold a thing until the moment it matters, and then you place it exactly where it needs to go. She placed it. She walked to her car in the November cold, her heels on wet pavement, the city lit and indifferent around her, and she felt, for the first time in longer than she could easily name, like exactly who she had always been.